Alright, in this tutorial I'm going to show you how you can use force fields and effector groups to cause only a specific force field to affect a specific set of particles. Alright, let me play this animation. See, the particles over here will be attracted to this force field, and the particles that were over here is attracted to this force field. Simple enough, right? And you do that with effector groups or with grouping, but you have to set up some other things, so it's kind of like effector groups. But anyway, let's go ahead and get started. Alright, I will be using Blender 3.0.1 in this example, but this process works pretty much the same regardless of which version of Blender you're using, except for in one respect. I will be using molecular script, so when it comes to molecular script, you will need to choose from these downloads which one you need. This version is obviously for Blender 3.1, and here's Linux, Mac, Windows, and so on and so forth. And you have this one, which is for Blender version 3.0. I'll put the link to this in here. Just pick the one you want, install it like you would any other add-on, and then we can start this. Alright, first thing I'm going to do is, when it comes to setting up effector groups so that it affects particles, so you can have like one force field attract the particles from one emitter and another force field affect the particles from a different emitter, you need to set them up in groups. And the easiest way to go about that is basically go ahead and set up all your objects. In this case, I'm going to add a cube. Now this is going to be my emitter. Now I'm just going to grab this cube and just move it to about right here. Alright, I'm going to go ahead and add a floor. Add mesh floor. And I'm just going to scale this up to yay big. It don't have to be exact by no stretch of the imagination. I'm going to press Control A and then apply the scale, because this will be a physics object, and anytime you scale the object in the viewport when you're not in edit mode, you need to apply the scale. Otherwise, sometimes the physics will get a little weird. Alright, now I know exactly what this is going to be. This is just going to be the floor. It's going to be what particles can impact, so I'm going to go ahead and set up the physics for that. Just click the physics tab, go up to collision, because this will be a collision object for particles, and I do want to add just a little bit of dampening so that particles don't bounce off of it at the same speed they hit. So I just want to let's say 0.5, so that if a particle hits it at 100 mile an hour, it's going to bounce off at 50. You know what I mean? Alright. And I'm going to add a little, just a hair of friction, 0.05. Alright. Just enough to keep it from sliding, keep a particle from sliding on the floor forever. Alright. Now, this right here is going to be our emitter. So I'm going to go ahead and name this Emitter. Alright. And I'm going to go ahead and name the plane floor, just so we can keep track of it more. And since we will be using cache files or bake files, we do need to go ahead and save this. File, save, and I'm just going to give it molec toot name and leave it at that. Alright. Now, let's go ahead and create a particle. Add, mesh, and then choose icosphere. Now I'm just going to grab this icosphere and just pull it down below the floor, because this is going to be the instancing object, the object that's duplicated into a bunch of particles. Alright, so I'm going to go ahead and give this one a material, because I want two different color particles in this example. I'm going to click on the materials tab, click new, and I'm just going to make this kind of a bluish color. Alright. Now I'm going to press Shift D and then just bring that one over here. Now on this one, I want to make it red. So it's already got a blue color applied to it because it copied it from this one. So if we click on this right here, the number 2, it will separate the two materials. So now I can change this one to a red, and then this one stays blue. See what I mean? Alright, because don't do this part right here. I want to press Control Z a couple times. Alright, until we just have one icosphere. Now if I was to press Shift D and then move it over here and then try to change this one to red, alright, then this one also changes to red because it's the same material. So we need to keep these separated. And this one I'm going to change back to blue, just like yours is right now. Alright, kind of a long-winded explanation of why you need to separate the materials. But anyway, alright, now let's go ahead and zoom in on this cube because we need to make this into a particle emitter. So we're going to go into wireframe. I'm going to select this cube, and I'm going to come over here to the molecular plus tab. Now you can just use the regular fluid particles if you want, but I'm assuming if you've downloaded the molecular plus add-on that you'll want to do this. And this is where your molecular plus, or at least one of the places your molecular plus settings are at. So with this cube selected, come over here and click on 3D grid. And basically this just fills it up with particles. Alright. Now the number of particles is controlled over here. Alright, you hit this particle tab and go to source, and then it automatically sets the volume because you clicked this button. Alright, now right here this random setting, I don't know why they have a random setting set as default. That makes no sense to me. I'm going to set it to 0 because I don't want any random particles. Now I do, for the sake of this tutorial being simplified, I'm not going to use that many particles. So I'm just going to set this to 20 so that the grid is 20, 20, and 20. 20 by 20 by 20. Alright, because that's a few amount of particles that's easy to calculate when it comes to this physics. The average computer can probably do 100, but it's going to take longer. Alright. I'm going to go ahead and click on cache and click on disk cache, and then I need to come down here to velocity, make sure all these are set to 0, come over here to the render tab, open that up, and the viewport tab. Now in the render tab we need to tell it to select object or render as object, and that's where this icosphere comes into play. Instead of, we want these particles to be represented by this icosphere. So what I'm going to do here temporarily, I'm going to select this icosphere and I'm going to name this Ico Blue because that's the color of it. Ico Blue. I meant to do this earlier and somehow forgot. And I'm going to select this one and I'm going to name this Ico Red. Ico Red. Alright, now I want this emitter right here to have blue particles. So I'm going to select it, come down here to the object and then the instance object and choose the Ico Blue as the instance object. Alright, now as you can see it inserted a bunch of icospheres. Now this is fine, we could leave it like this if we want, but it will slow down the computer if it's actually trying to display an icosphere in the viewport. So I'm just going to set this to circle. Alright, now for some reason if you set it to circle, this number right here is half the size of this number. We don't want that. So what we want to do, we want to adjust this number until it fills up the empty spaces between here, because this right here, it controls the size of the circles, right? The size of the particles, or the size of them in the viewport. Alright, and we want them to be right up against each other. So what I'm going to do in this case, I know this cube right here is 2 meters square, and I know I got 20 particles. So 2 meters divided by 20, you're talking 10 or 0.1 meters is what each individual particle size is. So I'm going to change, that's actually right, that being 0.05. Alright? But of course you can just play with it until you get the size right. But since we know this right here is right, we need to go ahead and change this one to the same size, 0.05. Alright? Probably didn't explain it very well, but that's okay. Alright, now we don't want our cube to show in the final render, so we will click or uncheck show emitter in the render settings right here. That way it will just render the particles and not the cube itself. Alright, now we want the settings basically for this, for the other cube, to be the same as this one, except the only difference is we want it to have the red particles instead of the blue particles. So we're going to, with this cube selected, or with this emitter selected, we're going to press Shift D and then X and then just bring it over to about right here. Alright, now I'm going to rename this one Emitter Blue. And this one we're going to rename to Emitter Red. Alright, now if we look at this one and look down here, we can still see it shows ICO blue. If the same way before, whenever we changed the color of this one also changed. We have to separate these two particle systems. Otherwise, when we change one, the other will change. So what we do, we come up here to the top, see how it's got the number 2 right here? That means those, you have two objects with that same particle system. So if we click 2, click that 2, it creates a duplicate particle system. Now I can change this one without it changing this one. But the only change I need to make here is basically come down here and change this from blue to ICO red. Alright, now we have blue particles here and red particles here, but everything else about it is the same. Alright, now let's add two force fields. Add force field and choose force field. Alright, and I'm just going to grab and put that up about right here. Alright, now let's go ahead and set the settings on this one. Go to the physics tab, and we want the particles, or we want the force field to be a negative power. Because if it's a positive power, it's going to push the particles away from the force field. But if it's a negative power, it's going to pull the particles towards it. Alright? Now, we're going to have these not come on right away. We want them to come on, let's say, I'm going to go ahead and set this to frame 500. Or set the number of frames to 500 rather. Alright. Now, before we go any further, I'm going to go ahead and do this just to make it simpler. I'm going to select this emitter, and I'm going to come up here to the particle system settings, and up at the top I'm going to uncheck these two boxes. And the reason why I'm doing that, I'm basically deactivating the particles. That way we can scrub through the timeline without it trying to generate particles. Know what I mean? It just makes it run way better and gets less glitchy. The big files tend not to get messed up. Alright, so let's go ahead and select this force field again. Now, let's say we want the particles to just kind of fall and then just spread over the floor. That's what's going to happen at frame 1, or start happening at frame 1. And then at frame 100, we want this force field to come on. Alright, so what we're going to do with this force field selected, come over here to the physics tab, and I'm going to set this to 0. Alright, and now I'm going to keyframe it. You click that and it keyframes it. So basically from the beginning all the way to 100, this force field is turned off. Alright, now I'm going to go forward to frame 150, and I'm going to set this to -20. Enter. And I'm going to keyframe this one too. And basically at frame 100, this force field starts to attract the particles, and it starts off very weak, because look at this number right here. Look at the attraction force as I go through the animation between those 2 points. The attraction force of that force field gets stronger and stronger until it gets to 20. Alright, now what I want to do is basically I want this to stay at full strength for about let's say 100 frames. So I'm going to go to frame 250, and I'm just going to add another keyframe, and then over the next 25 frames, which is the frame 75, I want it to its attraction force to go away to 0. So set this to 0 and then keyframe. So you see no attraction. It starts coming on. Okay, if you look at this number right here, it gets right here. It stays on at full power at 20, although full power isn't 20, but that's the highest we have it set to. And then it gets right here and it starts to fall off. Alright, and then when it gets to 275, it turns off. Alright, now what we want to do is press Shift D and then X, and then bring this one over here. So now we have 2 force fields, and they're both coming on and off at the same time. But if we was to just animate it right now, going to do its physics thing, the particles from this emitter would be attracted to both force fields, same way with this one. But we want these particles to be attracted to this one, and these particles to be attracted to this one. So this is where setting up effector groups comes into play. So what we want to do is just start with the one on the left. Select that one, and let's create a group. Press Control G, and it brings up this little menu, and I'm just going to name this Force 1. Oh, actually I'm going to name it Force Blue, because we want it to attract the blue particles. The blue particles are over here, so we want this one to attract the blue particles, so I'm going to name this Force Blue. Alright, now same way with this one. I'm going to select it, press Control G to create a group, but instead of calling it Force Blue, I want to call it Force Red, because we want it to attract the red particles from over here. Now, we didn't actually set up an effector group, not really. We just created the group. In order to make the physics work as an effector group, now we need to add these emitters to the respective group. Now, let's select this emitter. Now we want to add this one to the red group, Force Red group, right? Which is this one. Alright, so we want to select this emitter, and we need to add that to the Force Red group. That way this force field can affect these particles. So what we do is select this emitter, come down here to this tab, come down here to collections and add to collection, and then choose force red. Alright, now on this one, select it and then choose add collection and add it to force blue. Now with this particle or this emitter selected, and come over here to the particle settings and come down here to field weights all the way down to bottom nearly, and then on this effector group we need to add it to the force blue group. Alright, and on this one add it to the force red. So essentially all that is doing, adding the red emitter to the red force group, is basically telling that only the red force field can affect these particles. It seems like there should be an easier way to go about this, and there may be as far as I know, but I can't figure it out if there is an easier way. Alright, now we have that set up, so let's go ahead and give it a whirl, see what happens. Now when it comes to this Molecular Plus add-on, every time you get ready to actually start your simulation, go ahead and click this to refresh it. Of course, I made a mistake here. I need to go back over here and reactivate the each emitter, and then click this button, because that right there will automatically give an estimate of how many sub-steps it thinks it's going to need, and in this case 10, and that sounds about right. So I'm going to press File, Save, and then I'm going to press Start Simulation. Now if it does like it's supposed to, these particles are not going to be connected or anything. They're not being the force fields are not attracting any of them. But when it gets to frame 100, this force field is going to start attracting these particles, and this force field is going to start attracting these particles. And this is another reason why I only wanted to use a 20 particle grid, because I wanted it to simulate this portion quick enough to where you can actually see what's going on. Alright, you can see the particles are starting to be attracted. See, these are going this way and these are going that way. Basically, these are going towards this force field and these are going towards this force field. And of course, they meet in the middle and collide. Oh, see, that's a mistake there. I wish I would have caught that. Alright, see, it's not doing anything. They're not actually colliding with each other, which we want them to do. So I'm going to press Escape. I'm going to go to Free All Bakes. Now come with one of the emitters selected. Come over here to the physics settings and then click Collision with Others. Come over to the other one and check Collision with Others. See here? I make mistakes all the time. Now let's try it one more time. Start simulation. Now this time the particles should actually collide each other, but without clicking Collision with Others, then these particles from this emitter and the particles from this emitter cannot collide with each other. Yeah, see, now they're colliding like they're supposed to. We're up above frame 100, so the force fields have turned on and they're starting to ramp up to full power, which full power in this case is -20. And it should be at -20 at, I think it was what, 150? I can't remember. Yeah, at 150. And see, now they're colliding like I wanted them to. which it looks way better whenever they collide. And these force fields are staying on until it gets staying on at that power level until it gets to frame 250. Probably should actually have them stay on to about 350 so it has more time to settle, because as it is right now they're starting to turn off, the particles are going to be released, and now they're basically, whenever it gets to this point in the timeline, the force fields are completely off and now the particles are just free falling. But that's fine. I mean, the idea is just to teach you the process, and then you can make the modifications to it how you see fit. Now I'm just going to let this settle, or let this play out to these particles somewhat settle. I won't go past frame 500 just because time constraints. I don't want to wait here forever, and also I got several things I got to do today. I'm actually doing stuff on the other screen because I'm trying to download a bunch of stuff. Trying to multitask. Alright, so that looks like it's about settled down to where it needs to be. So at this point I'm going to press escape to stop it, and I'm going to come up here to the emitter settings, and I'm going to come to the particle settings, and just to make sure I'm going to press current cache to bake, go to the other one, current cache to bake. I'm just doing that to absolutely make sure that I don't lose my bake. Alright, I'm going to set this, the end frame, to 420. No particular reason behind that. Alright, now if we play through it, it'll play through it at full speed. Unless your computer's just not quite fast enough, but even a laptop should be able to do this at full speed. Simple enough. Now, let's go ahead and set up a camera. Now, with the cameras there, I'm just going to just kind of, well, let me turn my camera on. I'm going to move this camera back so we can actually see it. Now I'm just going to zoom in a little bit. And if you want to zoom in with your camera, where your camera actually fills up the screen like this, you come over here to view, and if this is unchecked, you can zoom in like this, but if you check it, it zooms in like that. See what I mean? So I'm going to get that to that position and then turn that on, and let's see, I'm going to tilt my camera at a 90-degree angle, and I'm going to back up just a hair. I want to say minus 30, and that's probably fine. And I'm going to go ahead and file save, and if I was to render a frame right now, this is what it looks like. Now you may not have an HDRI in the background, so if you don't have an HDRI, which is the background image, and it also sets up lighting, go ahead and go to like HDRI Haven. I think they changed the name of it though, and you can download a bunch of free HDRIs for backgrounds. Like right here, you can add different backgrounds, and it helps set up lighting, makes the lighting more realistic and so forth. Alright, now I'm going to kind of set up my camera. I'm going to set up depth of field. I'm going to go to my camera settings with my camera selected up here, and I'm going to check depth of field, and then I'm going to adjust this distance until this indicator right here is basically where I'm looking at. Alright, somewhere around there. And I'm going to set the f-stop to about 0.25. That way, if I was to click render image, the background should be a little blurry. If I set this, let's say 0.1, render image, See, the background's even more blurry, but these are still in focus. Probably a little bit more. 0.05 render image. Okay, that's about as bokeh as I would want it. Alright, now let's set up a material for the floor. So let's select the floor. I'm just going to give it a glossy black, because glossy black tends to look pretty good. Just go straight to black, and then set the roughness to about 0.1, and that's pretty much it. Let's render, see what that looks like. You see a good blurry reflection in the floor, which works pretty good. Alright, now let's go back to the viewport, and I'm just going to have a static camera in this for the art. Let me rephrase this. The camera is going to move, but not a whole lot. So I'm going to go back to frame 1, press 0 to go back into camera view, and I'm going to play this until the particles kind of settle, which is about right there. I'm going to back up to about frame 80, and with the camera selected, I'm going to press I on the location rotation, and then I'm going to go to the point where these particle or these force fields actually start to move these particles, which about right there. Alright, and I'm going to move the camera. I'm going to go up with it just a little bit. I'm not making a lot of changes, just a little bit, just enough so that whenever the particles aren't doing much, the camera is moving just a little bit. It's really all I'm doing. Alright, I'm going to keyframe those. That way, basically between 80 and this frame, the particles aren't doing much, but the camera moves. Alright, now I'm just kind of watching the particles, letting it get to that point. Whoops. And basically, at this point, the particles aren't doing a whole lot. Most of them has just fell to the floor. So at this point, which is about 320, I'm going to go ahead and add another keyframe. The camera's not moving between these 2 points. And then, let's go all the way to the end. And I'm going to bring the camera in some. I'm going to bring it over to the right a little bit, and I'm going to tilt it down, kind of focus in on that. And I'm going to keyframe these. Now we need to keep in mind, since we move the camera, we need to change our focus distance right here, and we need to keyframe that too. So I'm going to go back to the first keyframe. I'm going to press 3 on the keyboard so we can look at it from the side and see what this is focusing on. And we can see that this is correct, obviously, since we said it earlier. But if I go to the next keyframe, it's still pretty much correct. And go to the next one, it's still right in the middle. But when we go to the last one, see, it's focusing on something down here, basically around this area. We actually want it to focus around here. So we need to, right here, adjust the focus distance to there. Well, actually, I made another mistake. I do that quite often. I'm going to press Control Z. Well, yeah, okay, that's fine. And I need to go back to this point right here. And I need to keyframe this point. And then go to the end. And then adjust this to there, and then keyframe it. That way, watch this focus point change between these two. Even though the camera gets closer, the focus point stays virtually the same. That's what I was trying to get at. Alright, now let's go over here to the render settings tab. I'm going to set mine to 1920 by 1080, which is full HD. And I'm going to set my output, and I'm just going to call this Molek Effector group. Probably, yeah, I actually spelled that right. I'm actually kind of proud of myself. And I'm going to select that folder, and I'm just going to click accept. Alright, you can leave this to PNG. Realistically, PNG is a good format. It's basically lossless. And then if you're using multiple GPUs if you're using multiple computers to render this, or if you're using multiple instances of Blender to render this, then you need placeholders. Otherwise, you don't. It don't hurt if you use it, but you don't really need it. Alright, I think that right there is probably about right. Now let's make sure we have our settings over here correct. Go to our denoise settings. I use open denoise. Set the passes to albedo and normal. Set it to accurate. And motion blur, you definitely want motion blur, because I'll show you what the motion blur looks like. Alright, render image. I mean, the particles look like they're moving. That's what you want. You want that blur. Because if I turned off the motion blur, this is what it's going to look like. And then if you was to switch between them, you can see that the one with motion blur definitely looks way better. It looks like the particles are moving. So yeah, we definitely want motion blur. Alright. And I do believe that's pretty much it. Now, if you don't have an HDRI in here, you will need to set up your own lighting. One reason why I use HDRI so often is because HDRIs uses the light in the actual image to create light in the scene, which in my opinion it works pretty good. So I'm just using an HDRI for this, so yeah. But anyway, at this point we're going to press render. Well, actually I'm going to press file and save, render animation, and it should go through, and my computer's taking roughly 4 seconds per frame. And of course that's most of that time is, well, about half the time is being used for setup, or maybe about a quarter of time for setup. About half the time is being used for rendering, and what's left is being used for the denoising pass. So I'm going to let this go ahead and go through and render these, and when they're done, I'll get back with you. Alright, it looks like it's just about finished rendering. I got about 11 more frames to go, and it's taken roughly 40 minutes to render this, which isn't bad. Now if I would have had a second GPU in my system, I could have rendered it in probably 20 minutes, but I got that other GPU taken out of this computer for now. But figure got 7 more frames left, and then we can see what the animation actually looks like, and then we can assemble it into a video, because I want to start doing that. I'm going to try to do that from here on out. Anytime I do a tutorial where it's like an animation type thing, I will go all the way through the rendering process and then making a video out of the individual frames. I just think that's probably way better than not doing it. I've had a lot of people suggest I do that anyway, especially with newbies who not 100% familiar with all the process. Alright, there we go. It's 100% rendered, all 420 frames. I'm going to come up here to render and then go down to view animation. And right here, it's not making a video, it's just loading all the images into the computer system memory. That way it can just play or flip through the images really fast at 30 frames per second. That way you can actually see what it looks like in a video. And pretty much that's what it looks like. Nothing special, but it's just to teach you the effector groups. Alright, now if we want to assemble these individual frames into a video, this is how we go about it. I'm going to go ahead and click File, Save to save this, and I'm going to click on New and just choose General. Now up here, I'm going to change this from 3D viewport to video sequencer. And then I'm going to come here to Add, and then Image Sequence. And I'm going to find the images that I just rendered, which is right here, Melec Effector Group. These are the images, and all I'm going to do is press A to select all of them. Have the mouse hovering over and select all of them. Now, make sure they're going 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 in that order. If they're not in that order, you can change the order by clicking above here. Now that's reverse order, that's front, forward order, and of course you can sort them by date modified and size and stuff. But for the most part, we'd want it either in forward order or reverse order. But we want the animation to play forward, so we obviously want forward order. And then click Add Image Strip. Now, what do we want the output to be? The frame rate. We want I want mine to be 30 frames per second. Now I'm going to set this to 1920 by 1080 because that's the size of the frames that we are putting into it, and it's 420 frames, so I'm going to set this to 420. I'm going to set an output location, which I'm going to just have go to Blender Output, and change it from PNG to FFmpeg video. And then on the encoding, I'm going to set it to MPEG-4, and then use H.264, but change it from medium quality to perceptually lossless. That's how I do all mine, because it still compresses, but it doesn't compress a whole lot. And encoding speed, I always put it on the slowest, which means it's going to look for more ways to compress the video without losing, it's going to spend more time looking for more ways to compress the video, but do so without losing any quality. Hope that makes sense. Alright, now we don't have any audio, so we can leave this set to no audio, and that's pretty much it. Right at this point, we can just click Render. Well, actually, we need to make sure we have Render Region unselected, because if you have that selected and you go to Render Animation, you get this error. So if you unselect that Render Animation, now it will go through and actually compile it into a video. Alright, so here's the video popping up right here. Whenever it gets finished, almost finished. 26 megabytes, 27 megabytes. There you go, that's the finished product. And then of course from here you just take it over to whatever your preferred video editor is. A lot of people use Blender for their video editor. I have never been able to be proficient with Blender as my video editor, so I always use Power Director. But anyway, if you have any questions, leave a comment below and I will try to get back with you and answer your questions. I guess that's it. Later, people.